The annual NBA GM survey has dropped, and the Detroit Pistons were ranked one of the top 5 young cores in the entire NBA. Just how high should the Detroit Pistons young core be ranked? We'll talk about that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Ku Cahill. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Cahill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. There's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. In today's episode, I'm recording this a day before the Pistons' next preseason game against the Phoenix Suns. And the day before today, I'm recording this on Thursday. The day before, on Wednesday, the annual NBA GM survey has dropped. This happens every single year right before the season starts. NBA GMs get asked, I believe it's 50 questions they get asked. And they answer anonymously, and you get a little insight of how NBA GMs are thinking ahead of the NBA season. So I always find these surveys pretty interesting and fun to read. And the Detroit Pistons were featured quite a bit in this survey, and we're going to break down each question and each part of the survey that they were talked about in, like Cade being one of the players I think could break out this upcoming year, that impacted JB Bickerstaff. But where I want to start with first is where GMs have the Detroit Pistons young core ranked. So I want to start with going back to last year's survey and where the GMs had the Pistons young core ranked last season. And last year, they only had 3 teams that warranted enough votes to be included in like the percentages. If you look at the GM survey, they usually have the top either 3 or 4 teams that get the amount of votes, and they give them a percentage. And then another team that gets like 1 vote, they'll put teams also receiving a vote, and then you'll get included down there. The Detroit Pistons were included down there. They didn't get enough votes to be included in like the top 3 percentages. It was Orlando, OKC. I forget what the other team was, but the Pistons weren't in that top 3. They were just in that little team receiving a vote, Detroit Pistons. That was last year. Now this year, heading into the 2024-2025 season, they are ranked 5th. Last year, OKC got above, I think, 73% of the vote. This year, they only got 60%. I wonder how much of that is some GMs not considering OKC a young core anymore. Like, do some GMs that voted from last year now say, like, okay, they've made it deep. SGA is getting a little bit old. He's not old, but he's not, like, considered, like, super young anymore. I wonder how many GMs just did not consider, like, OKC, like, I guess, young anymore. I don't know. I don't feel like they should have lost that many votes, but they're still number 1 at 60%. Number 2 is Orlando at 20%. Number 3 is Houston at 10%. Number 4 is San Antonio at 7%, and Detroit at 5% with 3%. Now, it doesn't say any other teams received votes. So I think these were the only 5 teams who received votes from the GMs. So the Detroit Pistons did receive some of the votes. They might have only received, I'm not great with math. If there's 30 voters, I'm not even going to try to do that math. It is what it is. They got 3% of the votes of the 30 NBA teams. Where should the Pistons actually be ranked? And is this a fair ranking for the Detroit Pistons? As of right now, I think it absolutely has to be a fair ranking for the Pistons to be 5th. It's hard to argue them any higher. And there's a few reasons why, but there's a few ways that they could easily soar up this list and be considered in a much higher regard by the end of this upcoming year. But first, I want to talk about why I believe this is a fair ranking. Number 1, few of the teams ahead have what I'm assuming a lot of GMs believe to be a better core main guy. Like, obviously, San Antonio and Wemby. I love Cade. I don't think anybody's Wemby. Like, Wemby, I seriously think could be the greatest player of all time by the time he's done. He's that insane. So, like, no one has Wemby. That's a, check mark. SGA is one of the best players in the entire NBA right now. That's a check mark for them. A lot of people consider Paolo better than Cade at this point. Paolo was just in an all-star game, so I guess that would be a check mark there. And Houston, a lot of people, I would say at this point, outside Detroit, have Alperen Sengun in a higher regard than Cade. Why have Cade in the same group as Paolo and Sengun? I definitely understand why San Antonio and OKC get that check mark right now with SGA and Wemby. So Cade isn't good enough or hasn't shown to be good enough to where he himself is carrying like a San Antonio Spurs, like Wemby would for the Spurs. The Spurs could have nobody else, and just because they have Wemby, they would still be like top 3 in these votes. Like you get what I'm saying? So they don't have a core guy at this moment that elevates them to a point where they have to be considered like, oh, they might be number 1, they might be number 2. You feel me? So that's one. 2 is the play of the supporting cast around your main core guy. With OKC, I don't think anyone would disagree that OKC is by far and away the best young core in the NBA. I don't think there's anyone even coming close to competing with them. Excuse me. And I don't think there's much disagreement with that. With SGA, with Chet, with Jalen Williams, with everything they got going on over there in OKC, their young core is crazy. They have an insane young core over in OKC. So I don't think anyone would disagree with that. Orlando, along with Paolo, they got another guy who is like relatively on his level in Franz Wagner. If you're still counting WCJ as a young core guy, I know he's kind of trending, out of, I guess some people wouldn't consider him as young, but Wendell Carter Jr. is a pretty good player. Jonathan Isaac came back this past year and looked really good. Cole Anthony, you got there. You got Anthony Black. You got Jalen Suggs, who's improved every single year. So I understand why they would have Orlando as well up there. You got Houston around Alperen Sengun. You got Amen Thompson. You got Jabari Smith. You do have Jalen Green. But, I understand why people are higher on Houston Rockets. Well, I'm working down the list. With San Antonio, you got Stephon Castle, even though he's more of an unproven product. Again, like I said, and I really do believe San Antonio is just mostly carried by Wemby, if you want me to be honest. It's just Wemby is Wemby. And then you get to the Pistons. And the Pistons have, I would say, more pieces to their young core. They have Cade. They have a Jaden Ivey. They have a Jalen Duren. They have an Asar Thompson. They got an Isaiah Stewart. Like, they have a lot of guys that they consider, a Marcus Sasser, a Ron Holland. They got a lot of guys that they would consider a part of their young core. But outside of Cade Cunningham, Cade's the only one that's proven to be at this so far into their careers. He's the only one that's proven to be a legit good NBA player. How great he ends up being is still to be seen. But Cade's the only one that's proven that is a legit good, impactful NBA player at this point. Other guys, after this past season, a lot of guys have a lot of question marks. And after a season like this past year, when you win 14 games, you're not going to be thought of highly. And that's just the reality of the situation. However, that's why I would say that they are reasonably placed at 5. Those are the reasons why I understand it, and I would agree with it. However, throughout this year, they could easily soar up this list, and it's really easy to understand why. The Pistons, I would say, out of all these teams on this list, their young guys are not being blocked as much by, I guess OKC. Actually, let me walk that back just a little bit. I wouldn't say they have the most, but their young guys that really matter aren't being blocked by anybody. So they're still going to get a lot of minutes. Like Jalen Duren's going to get a lot of minutes. Isaiah Stewart is going to get a lot of minutes. Cade's going to get a lot of minutes. Jane Ivey's going to get a lot of minutes. When Asar Thompson is healthy, he's going to get a lot of minutes. Like, so those guys are going to get a chance this year to showcase their skill level and if they've improved or not. So it's not like their young core is giving up on and you have to, there's no chance. They're going to be given every chance this year. That's first. Second, their potential is there. These guys that the Pistons have just as much potential, I would say, and as a lot of these guys on this list. A lot of these guys on all these different teams, they have just as much potential, but they have not proven it as much as these other guys. Like Jaden Ivey has a lot of potential, but he hasn't proven it as much as some of these other guys on the other team. Jalen Duren has a lot of potential, but he hasn't proven it as much as some of these other guys. Asar Thompson was only a rookie this past year, but yeah, he has a ton of potential, but he's not as proven as some of the, like, you get what I'm saying. This year is the year these guys have to make the jump. And Jaden Ivey, through 2 preseason games, has looked great. Jalen Duren is contesting a little bit more around the rim. We know what he can do offensively. We haven't seen Asar Thompson, but we know what he can do defensively. Maybe Ron Holland starts off in the rotation. He looks really well. That's another chip feather in the Pistons cap for why they would be one of the top young core. So as of right now, them being at 5th, I don't think you can really argue against it after the season they had this past year and the teams that they have above them. I don't think you can make that argument. Is that where the Pistons should end up by the end of this year? No. And if they are still 5th by the end of this year, if you were to poll GMs or if you would just be honest and non-biased, I think a lot of people would be non-biased and say, okay, this is reasonable. I understand that they're fifth. At the end of the year, if you're still feeling like, yeah, I understand why they're fifth, something went wrong and things are not going well. Because by the end of this year, the hope is Jaden Ivey has improved, Jalen Duren has improved, Arsar Thompson has improved, and if they have, they should soar up this list. And I haven't even brought this up. Cade should take that next big step. Cade should take this next big leap. If none of that stuff happens, then the Pistons stay where they're at according to where we would rank their young core. Something has went wrong, and things aren't going well. If things go according to plan, they should be top 3 here. They should easily be top 3 here. They should be one of the top young cores that you think of instantly across the NBA. As soon as you think of young cores, the Pistons should be considered that by the end of this upcoming year if everything goes according to plan. So they have a chance to rise up this list. They have a chance to soar up this list. Whether they do or not, we have to see it play out. But that's what I have to say about how the GMs feel about the Pistons young core. Let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at KukaHill. How you guys feel about this? Do you guys agree that they're the 5th most promising young core in the NBA? Who would you have them below if you disagree? Or I guess I should say, if you do disagree, who would you have them above? I mean, why do you agree or disagree? Let me know again in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at KukaHill. Next, I want to talk about Cade Cunningham received quite a bit of votes to be the breakout player of the year this upcoming season. How realistic is that for Cade? We'll talk about that coming up. I'm a procrastinator. I wait to the last second with just about everything, and it often screws me over when it comes to buying tickets to my favorite event, whether it's a basketball game, a sporting event for football, basketball, baseball, whether it's a concert, whether it's a theater event, you name it. I always wait to the last second, and it often screws me over. I get a bad seat. I get some bad prices. But with Game Time, it's the best place to go purchase your tickets because you get last-minute deals all the way up to the last minute of the event and sometimes even after the event has already started. And along with this, you get the view from your seat within the app. So not only do you get great prices, not only do you get great deals, you can also see if that seat is the best for you before you have to purchase it, before you show up at the event. You get all that known to you before even purchasing the ticket. They also have lowest price guarantee, and Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Your purchase is also covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So one thing is, again, make Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Before we move on with this segment, during the season, when the regular season starts up, I'm going to start doing a Coos Player of the Game every single game. We're going to have a Coos Player of the Game, but I want to come up with a catchy name, a fun name for it. I tweeted it out and I asked for people to submit like some good suggestions. I also put it up on our YouTube community and got some suggestions there. So if you're listening and you have any cool suggestions for how we can name Coos Player of the Game, I got some good ones. I got like Kudos of the Game. I really like that one. We got the King of the Cahill. Like, we got a bunch of cool names you guys sent out. So if you guys got some other ones that are listening to the podcast, send it to me and we'll figure out one to solidify and make our Player of the Game name for this upcoming season. So I'd really appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you guys have already submitted a bunch of submissions and suggestions for me, really helping me out. All right. So another question with the GM survey was players most likely to break out this upcoming season. And the Detroit Pistons have a player that received a vote here, and that is Cade Cunningham. Cade Cunningham received 7% of the votes. I'm trying to get to the exact. I know he got 7%. I wrote it down. I want to make sure. Okay, here we go. He got 7% of the votes, and that is tied for 5th. The players who got more votes than him, and now this is all relatively like even. You can tell that, and there's a lot of guys that just received 1 vote, so you can tell that the GMs feel differently or have a lot of guys they believe could break out this year. But number 1 was Jalen Williams for OKC. Number 2 was a tie between Evan Mobley and John Morant. And let me go on a rant real quick before we even get to Cade. How in the hell can John Morant be on this list? John Morant is an all-star, all-NBA player. What is he breaking out and doing? What can John, like, this is the same thing that happened when he won Most Improved a few years ago. John Morant should not have won Most Improved. He was already a great player. He was already a really good player. Everyone knew Ja was a really good player. Most Improved should be saved for players who were not good who became good, not guys who were good that became really good, or guys who were great that became superstars. Like, we already know that is not how the award's supposed to go. It's supposed to be for players who were not considered very good that became, oh my God, they've made a big leap. They're actually a pretty good player. That's who Most Improved is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be going to these superstars for making the jump from stardom to superstar. Like, it frustrated me then, and now I have to see Ja Morant in the most likely to break out season. He already won the Most Improved Player of the Year award. He's already made All NBA. What else can he do to break out? MVP. So now we're considering going from All NBA to MVP to be a breakout season. Stop it. We gotta stop. I had to go on that rant real quick because I don't get it. I don't understand. It seriously gets on my nerves. How is Ja Morant possible to break out? How? What is the next bar that he has to get to that would just be like, oh my God, I couldn't see that coming? If Ja Morant makes it to the Western Conference Finals, is anyone going to see him and be like, oh my God, Ja did that? Ja Morant? That's enough of my rant. I hate oh my God. Let me just drop it there. All right. So that's tied for 2 with Mobley, Ja Morant, and Victor Wembanyama. I have no clue how Victor didn't win this, by the way. Putting all biases aside, Victor should have won this by a mile. I'm not going to lie to you. Victor might be a top 10 player in the league this year. Like, he might even be better than that. That's how insane Wemby is. But anyways, he was tied second at 10%. And then tied at 5th was Paolo Banchero, Cade Cunningham, and Brandon Miller. Other guys receiving a vote, Asar Thompson. Asar Thompson was one of the players that received a vote. So the Pistons appear in here twice. I'm interested to see Asar, how he looks this upcoming year, and how much, how much of a chance he is given to have like that kind of breakout season that he really shows up on the scene. Obviously, we don't even know if we're going to get to see it until he gets cleared and is allowed to play. So that's up in there, and who knows when that's going to happen. So it's going to be tough to really talk about that with Asar. But with Cade, I can understand where he's at. I'm not going to try to fight for him to be higher. I understand that he's where he's at. I think this is a right placement. I think it's ironic for him to be tied with Paolo at 7%. Because I think him and Paolo are on the same level as basketball players. I've went on this rant multiple times over the offseason. They basically put up the exact stats. They put up the exact type of efficiency. They had relative stats all throughout the board, except one played on a team that had a backbone of elite defenders at almost every position and just had actual really good basketball players at almost every position. And the other person played on a roster that was 14 wins worthy. Like, that's the only difference there. So I like to think that is a good little nod to, hey, you're right. Cade and Paolo are on the same page because, GMs voted and they ended up in the same area of guys that break out this upcoming year. So it makes me think that they might think of them as the same caliber of player. But anyways, moving on from that, how likely is it for Cade to have a breakout season this year? I would say incredibly likely. We've talked about this obviously all offseason, and I think that the GMs obviously are, at least a decent part of the GMs are agreeing with this as well. The Pistons added spacing. They added a bunch of spacing with Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway Jr., and Tobias Harris. They also brought back Simone Fontecchio. That was big time because the team after the second half of the season, the team after the Simone Fontecchio trade was a little bit better than the team we saw beforehand. So bringing that guy back to be a part of a full season is going to be impactful and be felt in a different way than it was after already suffering the 28-game losing streak, right? So they added spacing. They brought back the spacing. Along with that, they got rid of Monty Williams, which we'll get to a little later with JB Bickerstaff's votes that he received in this survey. They got rid of Monty Williams, who was horrible. Everyone agrees with that. And they brought in a guy that people seem to be high on. Again, we'll talk about this a little later. And Cade is going through what is most likely and what I believe to be his most healthy offseason, where he's had the ability to work on his game all offseason, not have to deal with an injury heading into training camp, not have to rehab throughout the offseason, and really just be able to work on your game and not have to worry about anything else. So Cade is set up to have a breakout season. This team fits his play style a lot more than last year's did. This team fits what he wants to do offensively a lot more than last year's team did. He's not dealing with an injury. He's not dealing with rehab. He's coming into this season healthy. He's coming into this season being able to work on his full off-season's worth of game, and he has a better coach and he has a better roster around him. And with that, Cade should really have a leap this upcoming year. And this should be a fun season for Cade Cunningham. He absolutely should be one of the players to break out this year. And I've obviously predicted that he will break out. I'm really interested to see the coverage of Cade when I believe he does. I want to know how much he gets talked about. Does he make any headlines? Do people give him credit? Do people start to give him respect? I'm interested to see how this season is going to go once he starts playing well. Because I think he really is going to take that jump this year, and I'm interested to see what the coverage looks like at that point. Because the coverage for Cade right now has not been very good. It's not been very kind to him. So I'm honestly kind of shocked that GMs had him. They voted him with 7% of this, survey. He received 7% of this survey, because I thought he wouldn't even get many votes. So I thought he would show up in the also receiving votes. I didn't think he'd be in the top 5 for most amount of votes. I didn't think GMs. I think that's a good sign, to be honest. That it kind of showcases that Cade's talent is that respected still. There's GMs that still think like, hey, it's not, this past few seasons have been bad in Detroit, but it's not because of Cade. And Cade is still that dude, and he's going to show it this year. So I think a lot of people should take it as a compliment. Cade should take it as a compliment. The fan base should take it as a compliment, and be ready for this upcoming year to see how much fun and how much he really does take that next step. So I'm looking forward to it. If you want to hear the other guys that received votes, you got LaMelo, another guy, I swear to God, Anthony Edwards. What do you mean breakout? Anthony Edwards already has. Derek Lively, Tyrese Maxey. I don't get that one either. Trey Murphy, Keegan Murray, Andrew Nembhard, Albrun Segun, Cam Thomas, Amen Thompson, and Asar all received votes. So let me know in the comment section down below if you guys think Cade should have been higher or lower. Do you guys agree, disagree with the survey? Again, let me know in the comment section down below or over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. Coming up, NBA GMs, man, they think JB Bickerstaff is going to have quite a bit of an impact for the Detroit Pistons. We'll talk about that coming up. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. I've told you guys this many a times. A few years ago when betting became legal in Michigan, I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to try out. Tried out FanDuel. I have not turned back since. It's super easy to use, super self-explanatory, and most importantly, super fun to use. And again, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Get started over there, and you can have a big return on FanDuel with that $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. There's another great way to support the podcast. All right, so JB Bickerstaff got a lot of respect, I would say, in this GM survey. The question was, which new coach or relocated coach will have the biggest impact on his team? JB Bickerstaff finished with 20% of the vote, tied with second most. He tied with Kenny Atkinson, who's in Cleveland now, and number 1 is Mike Budenholzer in Phoenix. Guys who finished below him was Charles Lee, Jordy Fernandez in Brooklyn, and JJ Redick in LA. So I think there's 2 ways you can look at this. One of the ways is pretty funny. I think you guys probably know where I'm going with it. One way to look at it is teams think JB Bickerstaff is that good of a coach, that good of a culture setter, that he's going to show up in Detroit and really turn it around, really set that culture and take advantage and really develop this young talent, this load of potential that the Pistons have untapped with some of their players. And JB's going to do that along with the staff that he brought over, like a Fred Vincent and all the others as well. That's one way to look at it, and I'm absolutely sure some of that played in. Another way to look at it is that GMs thought that Monty Williams was so bad this past year that simply replacing him with JB Bickerstaff will have that big of an impact on the team. One way to look at it is that Monty Williams led this team to 14 wins and was so bad that JB Bickerstaff could get here and get them to 24 wins that easy just because of how bad Monty was this past year, and they would consider that just a big jump. They think it could be that easy. And is one way you could look at it would be that they think you could have inserted any other coach into this situation that has a brain, and they would have done a lot better than Monty Williams this past year, and they would have received 20% of the votes. That's certainly a way you could look at it. And if that's a way you do want to look at it, I can't blame you. Monty was that bad. Somehow Monty keeps coming up. He keeps getting brought up on the podcast, but it is what it is. But yeah, no, I think certainly, I'm all jokes aside, I do seriously think that plays a part, that Monty was so bad that they're taking that into account. Like, he can't be as bad as Monty, and that team was the worst in the league this past year. They have to see major improvement just from switching coaches. So he obviously will make the biggest impact. But I do think there's a level of respect for JB Bickerstaff and his time in the league and what he was able to do over in Cleveland. He set the tone over there. He set the culture. He started off in a rough spot in Cleveland. They were at the, LeBron had left. They weren't winning very many games. They were struggling, and he was able to develop a lot of those guys over there and get them to where they are now. I don't know if they would consider themselves an Eastern Conference powerhouse, but they are one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference for sure, and that was in large part due to JB Bickerstaff's culture setting and development of the young guys. So I'm sure that a lot of it has to do with the respect of JB Bickerstaff as a coach and as a development coach. So, look, I think if you – let's just say you tuned out for the offseason, you didn't know anything about the Pistons, you didn't know anything they did. I do think if you just went through this survey and went up and down, it probably would have you feeling better about this upcoming season because the Pistons do seem to be it. Going from the GM survey to, I believe, Bleacher Report also put an article out about it. Also, you heard Tim Legler multiple times on ESPN during broadcast of their game against the Bucks, their first preseason game. There seems to be a level of belief nationally that the Pistons will be a surprise team. There seems to be, I won't say it's a ton of people saying, because there is a lot of people that believe, their over-under was set 24.5. So there isn't like it's a lot of people, but I do think there is or not quiet, but I don't think cult following would be the right way of saying it, but there's like a section, there is a decent amount of people that are looking at the Pistons and saying, hey, that could be a surprise team this upcoming year that does better than people think they'll do. And, with the way it's looked through two preseason games, with how Jane Ivey's looked through two preseason games, maybe that's what happened this year. Maybe that's what happens. And I hope so. I hope Pistons fans get a happy, fun season this year. And it seems like that GMs think it's certainly possible with the addition of JB Bickerstaff. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Let me know what you guys think about all this in the comment section down below or over on Twitter @KookHill. That's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. And until next time, guys, peace out.